Hi. Hello, everybody. So I issue my weekly invitation for everyone to move down front, and you take your weekly refusal to do so. But those of you who want to, come join us. So we're very lucky to have with us Peggy Northrop, who became the editor of Reader's Digest in December of 2007, and I can't keep up with titles, but all I know is that, Peggy, you're the global honcho of Reader's Digest. And what interests me about it is that people think of magazines that focus on international affairs as having a limited audience, because there are not that many Americans who are supposed to be interested in what's happening in other parts of the world, except specialized magazines like The Economist or Journals of Opinion or Foreign Affairs. And yet Reader's Digest, which has this global audience, has managed to cover the world out there in a way that few magazines do. So we'll maybe hear about some of that when Peggy talks to us. She began her career in newspapers, and I learned the other day that her family founded a newspaper. It's 100 years old in Western Pennsylvania. It's a daily paper. It still comes out. It adheres to all of the journalistic virtues and standards that are in contest on the internet, even as we speak. But her brother is the editor of it. So she grew up in this sort of with printer's ink in the family veins. She has worked at any number of magazines, including More Magazine, where she was the editor-in-chief for 3 years, Vogue Magazine, Glamour Magazine, Red Book Magazine, where she was the executive editor, and Real Simple, where she was the deputy editor. And during her tenure with More, the magazine earned many of the magazine industry's most valuable awards. It was nominated for a National Magazine Award any number of times. Her first year at the Reader's Digest, it won the General Excellence Award. And that is a very rare tribute, both because of the coming together with a new editor who is in the process of reinventing the magazine, and in the category that is the most important category that the awards are bestowed in, and in the larger circulation category. So it's a real special thing. You see her here, but if you watched the Today Show, you would have seen her there. If you watched CBS Early Show, you would have seen her there. If you watched PBS's PBS, you would have seen her there. She grew up in Washington. She went to Kenyon College, then went overseas, lived on a kibbutz in Israel, did some other things she shouldn't have done, which maybe she'll tell you about, and then came back here and went to Berkeley. And so we're very happy that you're with us, and why don't you come up here and talk, and then we'll start a conversation, okay? Thanks a lot.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks so much for coming out today on the most beautiful day we've had in months and months. I know you're giving up your outside time. I appreciate that. I'm going to talk a little bit about my history in media and what I'm working on now, and some things that I've learned from my 11 jobs at as many companies in 3 decades. I'm not sure I really recommend that, although maybe that is the new model. But I just wanted to ask you some questions first to get a bit of a read on the room, and to make it plain that at this particular point in history, I have just as many questions as you do. I'm not the person with all of the answers. So obviously, I'm assuming you all read the paper every day, you read magazines. How many of you actually buy the paper on the newsstand? Just give me a show of hands. Okay. How many of you subscribe to or buy on the newsstand at least 3 or 4 magazines every month? Okay, that's great. How many of those magazines are not New York, The New Yorker, The Atlantic, Okay. Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. And how many of you subscribe to this idea that information wants to be free? We've all heard this, right? Okay, there are a couple of people back there. The guy with the camera wants it to be free. How many of you have paid more than $1 or so for a ringtone or an app? Okay, a couple of people. That is very hopeful, I think. That's definitely going to be an answer for a lot of us, is getting a new revenue stream from the mobile market, which is booming and just huge around the world. So you don't need me to tell you that we're at this incredible tipping point in media where the old models, and from everything, how we sell our subscriptions, how we distribute them on the newsstand, how we work together as journalists, all these old models are literally crashing around us. And at my office, we call the iPad the iHope. I do hope that this is going to be a wonderful answer for us, but really today at lunchtime, nobody knows what this new landscape is going to look like for all of us. We are at an inflection point that is unlike anything we have ever experienced in our lifetimes, and let's hope we never do again. So we don't know what the business of journalism is going to look like. And I use that word business of journalism on purpose because I feel that those of us on the creative side have not actually paid very much attention to the business model, and we need to. It's very important to insert ourselves into that conversation. One of the reasons I took the job at Reader's Digest is because I had a chance to sit on the executive committee of a company that was being reinvented. I wanted to understand what the business was all about, how it really worked. I wanted to demystify it for myself. And of course, when we went into bankruptcy in August, I thought, well, I certainly got my wish there. We're out, by the way, as of February. But I do want us all to be more focused on the business model because as well as the art and craft of magazines, which of course is so important. And I say that because I'm not one of those people who thinks that advertisers are going to save us. Having been in situations where advertisers were really driving the bus, I don't recommend that as a way of ensuring that consumers have quality content. And we can't all work for billionaire patrons, although that's a pretty nice strategy for the next couple of years. I have certainly done that in my lifetime. So we need that business model that will involve paying for quality content. And you should be as concerned about that as I am. Otherwise, you are going to be working as volunteers, or as Matt Cooper, formerly of Time Magazine, told me recently, the new paradigm is 5 jobs, no health insurance. So if you get nothing else out of my conversation with you today, I would urge you, have a backup plan, have a sideline, save your pennies, don't go into debt, don't be seduced by the Carrie Sex and the City thing here in New York City. You cannot live that way. And while you're at it, advocate for health reform. So that's enough. That's enough on the depressing stuff. I am the editor of Reader's Digest, after all, where we have always striven to be optimistic and solution-oriented. And there are a lot of things to be optimistic about from your point of view. I mean, you really have advantages that nobody in my generation had. You don't have to ask somebody's permission to get published, for example. How much money we spend at Reader's Digest on printing and ink alone. Like, to print 4 pages of my little magazine costs $60,000. That doesn't represent the work of the editors, the personnel, the distribution, nothing. That's paper and ink. So all of a sudden, that barrier to entry for the kind of stuff that you all do has evaporated. That is a wonderful thing. And also because the business is in such turmoil, anybody of any age from any place with a halfway bright idea can get a hearing. At a time when all the rules are thrown out the window, creative people thrive. So that is a distinct advantage that you have. And remember, we have a business model problem, not a reading and information problem. We have more information available to us than our grandparents did in their entire lifetime, and people still want to read. The Magazine Publishers Association came out with a study recently showing that magazine readership has actually increased by 11% in the dozen years that Google has been around. So it's not a reading problem. People want what we do. And at a time when there's an avalanche of information coming at us, our ability to curate information and point people to what we think is important for them to pay attention to is a very valuable skill. So I'm bullish on your career prospects, and I'm not sure what your career path is going to be. It's not going to look like mine. You won't be multitasking, I won't be multitasking the way you will have to. But I hope you can learn a little bit about from my experience. I do think that there are some principles that carry through, no matter how you begin. So let me begin by talking about how I got to Reader's Digest. And I always sort of imagined that you could plan your career. I would look at people who had reached a certain level in our industry and think they must have had a plan when they started out, because how else would you do that? Well, I am here to tell you that apparently that is not necessary, because I never had a plan, and I never would have predicted that I would end up as the global editor-in-chief of Reader's Digest. I would have told you were crazy even as recently as 3 years ago. So let me just ask again, how many of you have grown up with Reader's Digest? Okay, all right, good, thank you. I was not one of those people. When I was called about this job, I actually had to go out and find one, and was not especially attracted to the idea. And then I started delving into its history, and for those of you who might know this, forgive me, it was started in 1922. At a time in American life when suddenly people in cities outnumbered those living in rural areas. So it was a time of tremendous social change. And the reading service that this guy DeWitt Wallace developed, where he took bits of information from other people's magazines and collated into a collection of 31 stories, was really designed for a new class of people who were striving to understand this changing world that they were in. They might not have been very well educated, but they knew that they needed new skills and new information in order to make it in cities. So some people have in fact called it the original wiki, and it put a lot of magazines out of business. A lot of the general interest magazines went out of business after Reader's Digest became very successful. The founders were quite conservative, and I'm always amazed. I mean, there are things that I find out about the Wallaces, including the fact that there was a suitcase full of $200,000 that was traced back to my office in the Watergate burglary. That came to light many, many years later. But the founders were quite conservative, but not necessarily in ways that we would recognize today. They would rail against the national debt in the pages of the magazine, but they mostly concerned themselves with these American ideas of freedom of expression, democracy, entrepreneurship, and they were huge philanthropists. Without them, we wouldn't have boys and girls clubs. Outward Bound was a DeWitt Wallace charity, and they were activists in a way. I mean, in getting information to people that they felt they needed to hear. For example, if you watched Mad Men in the last couple of seasons, do you remember the episode where they talked about Reader's Digest printing the Surgeon General's report on smoking? It was always, they campaigned for road safety, they campaigned for cars, they campaigned for car safety, they campaigned against smoking, all because they didn't have any advertising that would allow them to do that. They also, in the 30s, they published reports about what was going on in Germany. It became a real window on the world to people that they would not have had otherwise. Now, it grew to enormous circulation pretty much through the use of sweepstakes. So in the 70s, it was 17 million American subscribers, which was really unheard of. It was the first multi-platform brand where they had music collections, condensed books, which I'm sure you've all heard of, both fiction and nonfiction, lots of health and reference books that are sold directly through the mail, much like Rodale today. And of course, like the other mass circulation brands, Good Housekeeping, Better Homes and Gardens, we've stopped propping up our rate base to be that enormous number number, and we have managed it down over the years. Direct mail is really, really expensive. To keep your circulation at 10 million or 15 million or even 8 million, you're sending out mail. It costs $1 million to drop that much mail in order to keep refreshing your subscribers over time. So that has been a huge business challenge that we've been dealing with, and we are transitioning to a lot of digital products and to digital marketing and to acquiring subscriptions on our website. So also the company has diversified over the last few years. We now own Every Day with Rachel Ray, which was a very successful launch. The Ryman Publications, which are a bunch of magazines you've probably never heard of. Taste of Home is one of our big brands. And Reader's Digest itself has 50 editions around the world in 22 languages, 45 countries, and a total of 70 million readers around the world. I have a sign across from my desk up in Chappaqua that just says big, because I want to remind myself every day of how enormous this platform is. And it's been really fun in the last couple of years to think about what we can do as a big brand. So everything from around the world polls to a new feature we do called 4 Ways of Looking, which is 4 photographs from around the world, different ways of looking at anything from a flower. So we talk about the Holland flower markets and opium growing in Afghanistan and perfume makers, to a round the world poll about how people feel about weight loss and body image. We've got a partnership with CNN International. To some of the things that I think we must do as a brand like ours, we can do a story on human trafficking and get it out in 50 editions all at the same time, which is something that we're planning in September. So, but as I said, I didn't plan any of this. I didn't know it was going to be fun. I didn't know it was going to be interesting. So the fair question really is, how did I get here? As Victor indicated, I grew up in a newspaper family, and I just want to sort of go through the various jobs that I've had and kind of distill what I learned from them. Started out at this little community paper. My father was the publisher who would say, if anybody complained about, if an advertiser complained, he would say, my salary is paid by circulation. That's a wonderful message to get as a young person in this business. It inculcated in me a real respect for readers and a real sense of how a newspaper or a publication can become a source of a sense of community for people, and the responsibility that goes along with that. He always had his phone number listed in the yellow pages. Anybody could find him, and frequently did. And sort of as an homage to him, I still have my phone number listed in the Brooklyn phone book for anybody who's interested. After college and travel, I was an anthropology major. I went to 4 different colleges and took 8 years to get my BA. Again, it was not exactly the recommended route to success. Nevertheless, I ended up landing at the Berkeley Monthly, which was a small publication, really a shopper, kind of an upscale shopper with literary pretensions. It also had design pretensions, and it was the beginning, I think, of that idea that the design of mass publications mattered. Berkeley at that time was undergoing a revolution in terms of food and small retail shops, and it was kind of the Alice Waters was just coming onto the scene. And I became the editor there basically by going to the editor and saying, I can do this cheaper. Which I did. And I ended up going from there to the San Francisco Examiner's weekly magazine. I do recommend working at a weekly someday. You will never be afraid of anything again. The freedom of the intense deadline is something that you can draw upon in your career for many, many years to come. From there, I went to a small startup called Hippocrates, and it was eventually became what we now see as Health Magazine. It was bought by Time Inc. But there was a small group of entrepreneurial editors who wanted to reinvent a category of magazines, who felt as though health magazines were pretty much all the same, that they didn't take science seriously, they didn't take journalism seriously. It was a a terrific group of people to work with. I've been very lucky in my colleagues and bosses. In fact, Eric Schreier, who was the founder of that magazine, went on to become an executive at Time Inc. and then ended up running Reader's Digest. I had no idea I would follow in his footsteps. And all of the staffers who were involved in that magazine, we ended up winning a bunch of national magazine awards, and they went on to be consultants and to work with other very highly regarded publications. So that was my graduate school. I was working with them. Then I had an opportunity to come to New York and work at Vogue magazine. Again, a twist and turn, serendipitous. One of my rules is always go in the interview. I had not read Vogue magazine, which I am ashamed to admit. I was not a fashion person living in San Francisco. I called about the job, and I actually asked the managing editor to please send me some issues, which is just so boneheaded. I hope you never make that mistake in Europe. But nevertheless, I did end up getting this job. And my first experience really in negotiating, at least with Condé Nast, I turned them down and they offered me a whole bunch more money. So now, if you ever need any negotiating advice, I would say that is the first thing you need to learn how to do, is to say no and mean it. My anthropological training came in very handy at Vogue. I felt as though, okay, I've got a front row seat in this whole new world, and it was fascinating to work with people who were so dedicated to a kind of craft that I knew nothing about. So it was great. Anna, despite what people may say or what you may have read about her or seen in the movie, was actually one of the best bosses I've ever had. Incredible standards, set her own standard. I learned a tremendous amount from her. I left Vogue and I went to a magazine called Mirabella, which closed out from under me after about 4 months. There's a lesson here for you too. Do your due diligence on a company. There were any number of people who told me, this is a really bad idea. Do not go there. They are going to close. They are not committed to that. I had a small child at the time. I was the breadwinner in the family, and I was really upset when it closed. On the other hand, I had a job offer on the table from Glamour Magazine, which I promptly accepted. I really did not want to go to Glamour. I was a bit of a snob. I thought, it's a mass circulation women's magazine. What am I going to learn here? And I was, again, completely wrong. Everything that I thought I knew about Glamour was wrong. I learned more from the late, great Ruth Whitney than really anybody in my career. It was like working for somebody who was a headmistress at a really good school who could just see right through you. If you thought you knew what you were talking about, but if you were not completely buttoned up, Ruth knew. So I'll talk a little bit more about some of Ruth's rules later. I then went off to be the executive editor at Redbook, and it was a colleague that I had worked with who'd been the beauty editor at Glamour who became the editor-in-chief, and she really gave me a chance to be the executive editor. And again, there's a lesson in there about nurturing the relationships that you have right now, because those will sustain you in your career. When she left Redbook, I pitched that job. I really wanted to succeed her as editor-in-chief, which is it's a difficult thing to do. Oftentimes it's a complete cleaning house when a new editor comes in. So I didn't get that job. It was a great thing that I didn't get it. I was disappointed at the time. But I learned how to pitch business. I spent an entire year going on interviews, pitching myself as an editor-in-chief, and it helped me to know from a couple of my friends that many of them had interviewed 7 times for editor-in-chief jobs that they didn't get. I had exactly the same kind of experience. But what I learned from that, I spent a year after work every single day coming home and saying, okay, this is the next job I'm going for, making books of how I would redesign it and coming up with tables of contents for the next 3 months for these magazines. Even some that the editor-in-chief job was not, I sort of thought it might be open, but I just wanted to get in front of people, and it was a really, really great experience. I ended up at Real Simple as a deputy editor. It was actually a short-lived job for me. I got Time Inc. kind of out of my system. It was a magazine that was really changing a category. And it was interesting to go there after having been at Redbook, where so many consumers would say, oh, all these women's magazines are the same. And as editors of those mass circulation magazines, we would say, oh, no, they're not. You know, Ladies' Home Journal is a little bit different from Good Housekeeping, is a little bit different from Redbook, and we were slicing and dicing it, and we were not listening. We were not listening to consumers. When they started saying that all these magazines are the same, Time Inc. listened. They started real simple. It was a design revolution, and suddenly they had a hit on their hands. So it was a great lesson to pay attention to the chatter, because it really means something. Don't be so arrogant and so stuck on your positioning that you can't see where the opportunities are. I ended up, from Real Simple, I went to a magazine called Organic Style, and we were a little ahead of the game. This was the passion of Maria Rodale, who was now the CEO of the Rodale Company. They had essentially invented organic farming and bringing it to the United States and popularizing it here. They wanted to start a magazine that they launched it out of Organic Gardening, which was one of their old publications. They knew that there was suddenly a number of celebrities and people in the style industries who were interested in organic sourcing of materials. But it was, and my job was to sort of bring this a little bit closer to reality. You know, there was the organic style stuff out here that was very, very expensive for people, and my revelation in that job was to say, for most people, environmentalism is about the environment that's right here. It's like what you eat, what you expose yourself to. It's the health of your children. And so Organic Style, we built the circulation up to about 750,000, but we were just too far ahead for advertisers and too far ahead, frankly, for the company. They had benchmarks. I now know that when people start talking about hockey sticks, if you hear this term in your career, when the business people are saying we're expecting a hockey stick, that means that, you can do that for a while, but if there isn't a hockey stick, you're going to be out of a job. So that's a little tip, like passing along to you. From Organic Style, I went to More, and More was, again, sort of an against-the-grain evolution for me. I was very interested in coming to a magazine that I thought should appeal to me as a woman in her then late 40s. And it was really aimed at this group of women who suddenly had a whole lot of money. Their lives were changing, their children were getting out of the house, and they were not the subscribers. They were the inheritors of Glamour Magazine. They were not the subscribers to the big circulation magazines. They were not having lives like we weren't having lives like my mother. So it was an opportunity to reinvent that magazine. We did a redesign, and it was really fun. We focused on reinvention, and it was a tough place to leave because I felt it was sort of my spiritual home. This was the first time I'd ever worked at a magazine that was all about me. That's really fun. So I hope you get to have an experience like that. But then the idea of coming to Reader's Digest came along, and for me it was the opportunity to run a flagship magazine, get some international experience, and do something that a lot of people frankly said was impossible. I had so many people say to me, you know, it's a brand that doesn't have any equity anymore. But I disagreed, and I wanted to take on this challenge. Also, I think that at a time of information overload, this notion of the Reader's Digest version has sort of new equity. And in fact, in August, you will see we're launching a new website called, indeed that, Reader's Digest version, where we take the things that people always say about our brand. Because people who haven't read the magazine still think of us as the condenser and the aggregator of information. And it took me several months to figure this out. It was not like a plan that I came in with, but I realized that's our brand equity. And with people who don't know us, we should own that. I started hearing, I think the night that I had this idea, I started hearing Rachel Maddow was talking about the bank bailout. And she said, and the Reader's Digest version of this is, I thought, wow, here's this person. I would not have expected her. She's not a Reader's Digest reader. I'm not expecting her to use this phrase. And then I started searching it on Google and searching it on Twitter, and people use it as part of the lexicon. So we are building on that brand equity and inviting third parties to post their own Reader's Digest versions on the site. We will do it as editors, and then we will invite readers to give us their own RDVs also. So I have high hopes for that. So anyway, a theme emerges, I think, in my career. I have always been really curious about the next step, and I encourage you to maintain your curiosity. That is what will propel you through these times and all others. I like the challenge of kind of getting my arms around something and making a big difference, going to a publication where my presence actually means something, that I can do something really different. That's certainly what, whether it's a redesign or reaching new readers or a refocus or reinventing a category of magazines or bringing a different kind of information to a target audience that I think needs or would like that. That's what's motivated me. So I've had twists and turns and failures, lots of strokes of luck, and I expect to have more. I never take anything, especially now, never take anything for granted. It's all changing out from under us and around us, and it's really important to keep that orientation of looking constantly for what's the next evolution in the place where you are, what's the next evolution in our industry. So as I said, you won't have the same career path that I've had. You'll get digital experience probably at the same rate that you are getting print experience and writing experience, editing experience. Someone asked me at the office the other day, what do we need to do to prepare ourselves for the advent of the iPad? And I said, I don't know. I guess I have to learn how to be a television producer. Clearly, video is going to be very important on these new platforms. So you need to learn all of that stuff, acquire those skills, get yourself a flip camera, and when you do an interview with somebody, capture some video at the same time. But I do think that we get hung up on this idea of platforms and this notion of, well, there's the digital platform, and that is somehow very, very different from what we do in print. And it's an argument that I have constantly with the digital people at my own company. But I really think that we're all doing the same thing. We're trying to tell stories, we're trying to engage people, we're trying to find ways to get information and opinion across in whatever platform it is. Some of these platforms have advantages over others, but as I said, we don't have a reading problem, we have a business model problem. We will be able to reach people through these new platforms in ways that I think are very powerful and that advance the cause of journalism. So if I had to boil down my advice to you in a few bullet points, I would give you these. I think I've got 7 or 8. So the first one is, don't be a snob. And I'm only telling you ones that I've had to learn the hard way in hopes that somebody will avoid at least one of my mistakes. So don't be a snob. I was a terrible snob about women's magazines, and I was so wrong until I realized the kind of conversation that you can have with those magazines that pay so much attention to their readers. The readers really matter in those magazines, and the conversation between the editors and the readers is what is key to their success. There's just a tiny slice of the population that reads the sort of leading intellectual journals, and don't cut yourself off from what you can do in these other magazines, because it's very rewarding. It's also where you make money. Let's face it. If you want a good salary, you want to go where the success is. Number 2, and I indicated this before, always go in the interview. I wouldn't have had half of the jobs I've had if I'd somehow thought, I wouldn't want to do that. Somebody said to me, it's a long life on a small island. You go on the interview, you learn how to pitch business, you make a contact, you find out what's going on. I go on interviews now. If somebody calls me to want to talk about a job, I'll go. Because I want to know what I'm missing, and I want a sort of outside view of what I'm worth. It's a really important check for you. I would also say specialize in something that takes a little bit of time to learn. Again, I ignored this advice until I had been in the business for a few years. I really wanted to be a sort of general interest editor because I was curious about a lot of different things. And someone took me out to lunch and said, what the business really needs are beauty and health editors. And I thought, that is such a bore. I don't want to do that. Well, of course, I ended up getting a job at a health magazine and learning a great deal, and it was what propelled me to New York. It's the kind of thing that you can build upon over the course of many years. It's a specialty that matters to a lot of people. And where there's an opportunity to make a real difference as a journalist because you can develop relationships and translate information for a lay audience. Look around at who's running things. When I was working in newsrooms, I looked at the guys who were running it. It all come up through the sports department, and I realized it's like, oh, well, that means that somebody here cares about good writing, and clearly that's the career path to the top. And of course, a lot of women were not interested in sports, and so it kept them out of the quarters of power for a long time. Most important of my rules is be better than you have to be. This was a Ruth Whitney line. Wherever you are, set your own standard, not the standards that are the prevailing ones. There is a famous editor-in-chief here who courted me a couple of times, and I never wanted to work for her. She will remain nameless, because she used to say things like, oh, well, our readers don't really care. They don't care about that. We'll give them one thing, is they don't really care whether this is any good or not. It's like, yeah, they do. I mean, what's the point of what we're doing if we're not going to give it our best effort? And I think that especially now, when there are literally content mills where you can sign up to write a story for $10, that attention to quality and depth of reporting and just being better than the room is really, really important. Ruth always used to say, what's in this for the reader? And all of us who worked for her at Glamour have that written down somewhere and refer to it every day. I would also say, don't be afraid of failure or overreaching or even of losing your job. It is likely that will happen. It's happened to me. It's happened as magazines fold, and be prepared for the ups and downs. Very helpful tip, at a certain point you can start negotiating your own severance. I do recommend that. Then you don't have to worry about whether it folds this afternoon. You've got a deal that will carry you through. Pitch the business, as I was talking about, learning how to pitch the business, going on those interviews, bringing your curiosity and excitement into every room where you go. It's not enough, of course, just to be curious and excited. You also have to ask for the job. These days, as a person who does a lot of hiring and a lot of firing, it's all about upgrading talent. So I don't talk anybody into a job anymore. I've learned the hard way that if I have to talk somebody into the job, they're not going to want to really be there for very long. I want somebody who comes in promising to solve my problems and do it with an incredible amount of energy. As I said before, pay attention to the relationships you are in right now. These are the relationships that will help you as you make your way in the world. And never piss off your assistants, because if you're lucky, someday you will work for one of them. That becomes more important the older you get. Ask for help and say thank you. My husband, who was teaching journalism at Eugene Lang, told me a story just this morning about somebody that he had worked with and that he felt very bullish about, who called and asked for help, and he recommended her to the editor-in-chief of a very well-regarded website, and a week later she called back and said, well, and he made the phone call and said she's going to call you, and a week later she called back and said, well, I lost the email, and that's just lame. So it's really important, those niceties that really matter. The people who, you don't have to write me a handwritten thank you note. Some people do that, and I am very impressed. I don't do that, but it's very important. It shows a sense of follow-through, that you're paying attention to those details, and it makes you stand out in the crowd. And the last thing that I want to talk about is just pay attention to the bottom of your resume. I am often accused of looking at the bottom of the resume first by the folks in my office, and it's partly because of my own history. But I want to know what else is going on in your life. You know, have you hitchhiked through Thailand? Have you lived somewhere else? Have you done something that shows that you're not just a careerist? You know, I don't necessarily want to hire the person who has been at the top of their class all the time. In fact, I don't want to hire anybody who feels entitled to the next step in their career. I want to hire somebody who is living a life that shows me that they are able to take in information from lots of different sources and continually challenge themselves. So I think it's really important to go out and have those other kinds of experiences that maybe don't fit into the box of our career. And especially now, none of it is going to hurt you. So really, it's have a life. Have a life. Everything that you learn in your life will come in handy in these kinds of jobs. You know, I do think it's an amazing way to make a living. There are no boring days, and there certainly aren't any boring days right now. So that's enough for me. I want to leave some time for questions, and I hope you will ask me anything. Thank you.
Great. This is inspirational to me. I have to go and fix up the bottom of my resume and most of the middle and the top, and then invite you in for an interview for the Columbia Journalism Review. And there's a lot to talk about, and I will ask you a few questions, and then we want to invite everybody else to jump in. So you talked about redesign a number of times, and I take that to mean both artistically, which you did with the Reader's Digest, but also spiritually, intellectually, rethinking the whole thing. When you redesigned the Reader's Digest, and you said that you sort of researched in advance of the redesign, could you share with us what does it mean to research a redesign? How do you have focus groups? Do you call in 25 different artists and look at what they propose? Do you tell them what to do, or tell them who your readers are and what they want, and they tell you what? Could you fill us in on the process you went through in redesigning the digest, which was a successful process?
Well, the redesign process at Reader's Digest was kind of an odd situation because I actually came into the job when a redesign was going on with the current art director, and they had a number of focus groups, but there was a lot to be done, I thought, on the product and the pacing and the sections, the way the sections stacked up, and instead of I didn't do very many focus groups on that. We did them afterwards. But what I wanted to do was think about what does this brand stand for? How can we bring it more into the modern world? How can we bring some of the packaging tools that we all use as magazine editors, how can we bring those into the pages? So that was when we started this new section called the Digest, which is harking back to our roots as an aggregator, where we would repackage stuff from other sources and create quirky little juxtapositions of lists and do quick interviews and just ways to engage people on the page more. And I wanted to. You mentioned something earlier about Americans are not interested in the rest of the world, and that was an article of faith at Reader's Digest among my editors. And I also wanted to challenge that and find ways to bring in some of this international content in a way that made sense for our brand. And the first way we did that was visually, and we made some. I always think. Tina Brown used to say, do what you have to do so you can do what you want to do. So there were certain things that I knew I had to do every month. I knew that everybody loved the human dramas, the human interest stories. Everybody loved the jokes. I couldn't get rid of those. I could not reduce those.
Did you want to get rid of the jokes?
No, I didn't want to get. I wanted to make them funnier.
Good.
Which is, you try to do clean humor every month. It's really hard.
Right.
But I felt that there were ways that we could take risks with the kinds of stories that we were proposing, and we started doing a lot more photojournalism. Really, the first way that I made an impact on the magazine, my photo editor loves me, I'm glad to say, is I just said, we've got these small pages. It doesn't mean that our photos have to be small. We can have high impact photography in these small pages and devote a little bit more space to it. So that was really the process that we went through, is thinking about why do people come here? Why do people buy this magazine? What is it that they're very, very loyal to? And then what do we have permission to do? And what do we have permission to kind of shake them up about a little bit? I think that people don't read magazines just to have all of their ideas confirmed. I think there's a certain amount of that goes on where you have, it's like, this magazine is for me and it reflects my point of view. But the other reason we do it is, show me something new, surprise me a little bit, and, rub me the wrong way. So I don't think you can be, you don't want to be afraid of that, even at a big publication with a long history.
Right. Okay, so as you said, the original founders, they had a different, you're consistent with their basic idea, and yet they had a politics,
yes.
Conservative politics. And I know in the New York Times Magazine, when they wrote about the new Reader's Digest, they said you were going to take it in a conservative direction, and you've disputed that. And would you share that view with us?
Yes. Well, that was an interesting experience. As I think it's a tonic for all of us to be written about occasionally, written about and misunderstood. It reminds you of the power of the press to really screw with your head. I spent a lot of time having to, both with my readers and with others, trying to bat that little demon out of the way. So the idea that we were taking this into a conservative direction really had more to do, I think, with the Times and the Times' politics than with our own. At the time, we had launched a magazine with Rick Warren, the Purpose-Driven Life guy. And this was actually a project that Frank Lally was working on. And because of his politics, it was seen as, well, we're getting in bed with this, with this quite conservative preacher, although he's on, if you look at the spectrum of those guys, he's kind of on this end, not on that end. And so I think it was conflated with a magazine strategy. In fact, the Reader's Digest, while we have, I always say it's a values-driven publication. It does represent a certain kind of values, and the values are ones that I don't think are political values. Family values doesn't necessarily mean what it has come to mean in the political in our political life. But I sort of fell right into that polarizing trap. Being able to talk about people who care about their communities, care about their families, care about what's important in life, who are looking for a sense of meaning in life, does not mean that they're rabid conservative, right-wing, crazy people.
Right. In the old Reader's Digest, John Cheever's son, Ben Cheever, once wrote a piece about when he left the old Reader's Digest, and he talked about the fact, this is like 25 years ago, he talked about the fact that every year at Christmas, when DeWitt Wallace was there, every employee of the company would get a turkey.
Yes.
And then one year, new folks came in, the Wallaces passed on, and instead of getting a turkey, they got a $15 gift certificate to go and buy their own turkey. And he saw this as a major change in the culture of the Digest. Now, are you going to reinstitute that? No.
Turkey.
I'm serious about this question this way. From your own career and what you've talked about, and how you've gotten various jobs and how you brought people in to work, loyalty seems to be at the center of the way you've experience the magazine business, and collegiality, and respect for your fellow workers. And so I'm interested in the sort of the culture of the digest these days, and how you foster a culture that yields maximum creativity, and this thing that you talked about of having everyone aspire to do better than their best.
Well, we don't do it with turkeys, and you know, coming from a community newspaper background, and you know, with people talking about the golden age, it's actually a really difficult situation to come into, because the nostalgia doesn't help us at all these days. It doesn't help us with the business challenges that we have. My feeling always is that people are loyal to you when you devote yourself to doing your own best work and bringing out their best work, and constantly challenging. I'm not just challenging my staff, I'm challenging myself. It's like, okay, can we do what else can we do here? You know, what can we, I mean, I know I drive my managing editor crazy, because I will look at I'm less involved in the day-to-day of the magazine than I have been, because I have so many other things going on. So I'll sit down with a lineup and say, okay, but where's our surprise, or where's the story that's really about what everybody is talking about? And I know this is good, but is it really as good as it can be? And I remember Ruth Whitney doing this. She would get her laser focus on a column that was highest rated with readers. And she would say, well, I'm bored. And so I'm bored. That means everybody else is going to be bored soon. So let's change it before anybody gets bored. And I think the people who work well with me and who tend to follow me around, to the extent that they do, are also people like that, where, you know, you're constantly, you know, you've kind of got the god of art on your shoulder, thinking, okay, this would fly. Everybody else is doing something like this, but what else can we do?
Right.
So, and I fail many more times than I succeed.
Let me ask one more question and invite you to join the conversation. So the digest now comes out 10 times a year. So what was the strategic theory and economic theory and every other theory? I'm bringing it back to that.
Well, really, it's a question of, you've got 8 million magazines. It costs $1 million to print every month, and the circulation economics right now are punishing. They really are. I mean, postage and paper and acquiring new subscribers. We were in bankruptcy. We had to make some really tough decisions, and there were layoffs. There were the toughest thing I've ever had to do was fire people who were doing a good job for me just because it was a math exercise. But sometimes those are the things you have to do. The decision to take it down to 10 times a year was definitely one to save cost. But it was also a recognition that if we could save that money, we could reinvest it into some of these new platforms that are coming up. We could reinvest it in the website. We could reinvest it in digital, experimenting with digital editions. So that is the hope, that as we can start making more money in these other revenue streams. We have a couple of, for example, we've got some iPhone games that are based on our content, that are starting to do very, very well, and so we need to build up the revenue in another way. And it's hard. It's hard when you've got people paying. We've got our loyal subscribers are paying very high rates for the magazine as they renew, and they're giving a lot of gifts. But the new subscribers that you acquire via online digital subscriptions are paying the lowest introductory rates. So it's a tough challenge.
Okay, why don't you join in? Anyone? Yeah. All right.
Hi. Yes, I was wondering. I really admire your dedication to quality and to standards, and I was wondering, when you come into a magazine as a junior editor, it's often very difficult to convince people to change their ways, to not kind of do it the way they've always done it, not to get a little bit kind of in the routine. And how do you do that? How do you convince them or kind of charm them, I guess, into, doing something a little bit more different or exciting?
I really think it's about coming forward with your ideas and not neglecting what it is that the magazine thinks it's solving for. I mean, if you think of every magazine has a problem to solve or sees itself as I'm solving a problem for my reader, make sure you understand what the aim of the magazine is and what the magazine is about. Very, very often, one of the mistakes that junior editors make is that they come in, they've got their own agenda. It doesn't have anything to do with the readers. It doesn't have anything to do with those problems that the readers have. So if you can come up with fresh ways to approach the things that the readers really like and really appreciate and really need every month, I mean, we're always looking for new packaging ideas. So, and especially in women's magazines, there are certain things that you do every single month, and to be able to come up with a fresh approach to, the beauty story, to the relationship story, to the, you name it, you know what the categories are, but to continue to come up with fresh approaches and just, be the idea person. Just be the idea person.
And how do you pitch those without offending more senior editors?
The really great senior editors won't be offended if you are trying to help them do their jobs, and there are places where people are competing for space, competing for airtime. I think that that's less true now. I think everybody is working really hard. One piece of advice that I would give is you don't want to be at an overstaffed magazine. I don't know that those exist anymore, but certainly when I worked at Vogue magazine, there were some people who were assistant editors, very well-educated young women who were making nail appointments for senior editors. I mean, you don't want to be in a place like that. You should, that's a place to be as a senior editor, not as a junior editor. So I think being in a place where you can really add value because you're willing to take on whatever job it is, and then to continue with that stream of ideas, the best people will not be offended.
Thank you.
Choose your bosses carefully.
Yeah.
I have a question for you. Put yourself in a hypothetical situation question. If you were in your late 20s and coming into the job market and you had the opportunity to go to a small publication and be in a management situation, or you had the opportunity to perhaps try for a low-level position at a bigger publication, what would you do?
Well, I can tell you what I did do. I became a manager.
And why?
And why? Okay. I was at the Berkeley Monthly where I became the editor-in-chief. I was 27 or something. I didn't know what I was doing. I really didn't know what I was doing, and I think it showed. I look back at what I was doing, and I realized I didn't know enough to do that, and I didn't have enough people around me to make me look good. And I had the sense to leave and go to the San Francisco Examiner and work on I went from being an editor-in-chief of this monthly magazine to being an associate editor and working for one of the best people in the business, somebody who really taught me how to edit. I think it depends on what does management mean. Are you going to be working as part of a team with people who have more skills than you? Then that's one kind of a situation. Will you be with smart people that you can learn from? Can you do a lot? Can you try a lot of things? At a bigger publication, will you really get the training you need, or will you be doing the grunt work, and 2 years later maybe you'll get a byline? It's a tough thing to sort out. On the other hand, you look at it this way: you have two options, which is good. We should all have such problems.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, go to the mic so that we can capture your Question on sound.
When did Reader's Digest stop being a digest of other? I mean, I've kind of lost the thread.
Yeah.
And it looks like the Week magazine, which is now sort of the new Reader's Digest, is doing very well, curating, to use your word, what's published elsewhere. And is that a model to go back to, this curation model, or is it a model to stay away from?
Well, of course, I have noticed the Week, and I mean they have small circulation, but it's growing circulation, yes, it is a Reader's Digest. It really is, on a weekly model. It's one of the reasons that we're doing Reader's Digest version online that we're launching in August, as I mentioned. I do think, well, there are several things that I've done in Reader's Digest itself that hark back to those days. And I still hear from readers who say, make it the way it used to be. I really liked it the way it was. The reason the decision was made, and obviously it was long before I arrived, it was probably late 80s, went from almost all excerpted content to almost all original content, was the internet. People thought, oh, well, we're not going to be able to get the rights to these other magazines' material because it's going to end up on their websites. That, of course, has changed a lot. I mean, people are not necessarily doing that with their websites anymore, although the rights issues still come into play. So the idea of being able to excerpt whole stories is, I think, less appealing than it was. But I have gone back to that a little bit, and certainly in the digest section, we did something last September where I knew that the healthcare debate was going to be on every front page, and I thought, how can we refer to this without going and doing all of our own reporting? Because what really matters here is to frame the debate for our readers and give them snippets of things. And so we got an excerpt from Atul Gawande's story that apparently President Obama had read out of the New Yorker. We got somebody's blog, a doctor's blog. We got somebody on the conservative side. It was a fairly an array of arguments, packaged them together into a 6 or 7 page story, and it was one of the most popular things that we had done. So I'm definitely thinking, if we have to do more iterations of Reader's Digest, that is definitely another way to go. Because I do think that curation has become very important to people. I mean, I look at all of the websites that are growing. Think of Politics Daily has something called Daily Guidance, which essentially is a Reader's Digest of the day of what's going on in politics. Daily Beast, their news summaries every day. I get them on my iPhone, and it's a quick, okay, these are the 5 things that this group of people thinks are important for me to pay attention to. So it's an idea that never really dies.
Do you think of the digest as the sort of sun and all of these other things that you're doing around the world as it's a magnet in the front and everything else is related to it? Or we now have so many platforms that the magazine is just another platform? I'm also curious related to that. The magazines around the world, do they add their own content, or do they just take yours and put it in different languages?
I'll answer the second question first. The 50 editions around the world are about anywhere from 30% local content. Then another large percentage is regionally shared. So all the Chinese language editions, and we have there are 3 dialects that we have it in. So there's the Hong Kong Chinese, Taiwan Chinese, PRC, and they also share content with Australia and with Thailand, and some with Indonesia. So there's a lot of regional sharing, and that's a very efficient model. And then there's stuff that's picked up from the U.S. edition, from the Canadian edition, and from the U.K. edition, which is about 90% original content. So there's a lot of sharing. And one of the things that we're indeed looking at now is grouping more of the European content. You figure if they've got the Euro, why don't we have more of a Euro magazine? But the idea of, what's the most important platform, there are two ways of looking at it. There's the consumer way, and then there's the revenue model. And the revenue is still coming from our print publications. Although in Europe, it's coming from our Reader's Digest book business. And the magazine is kind of a front door to this back-end business in direct books. But increasingly, I think we have to look at it the way consumers do, where, yes, you might maybe still making most of your money in print, but people are accessing you on the web every day or every hour. They are downloading things as often as they are receiving the magazine in your hands. And I think a lot of us in the business are at that point where we're trying to see where's it going to land. Will the digital version of Reader's Digest on iPad end up being as popular as the print magazine is or was or could be? That really remains to be seen. I mean, I hope so. I actually hope so.
Good. Anyone else want to join in? Yeah.
What's the organizational structure with respect to the writers? Like, I know you have some regular columnists. How many staff writers do you have? How do you deal with freelancers?
We have very few staff writers. In fact, as we went through a lot of our cuts in the beginning of 2009, as the recession was really hitting us all, unfortunately, one of the easy things to do is to get rid of people who only do one thing. So I have transitioned the staff much more to, and editors are in the center, and then you can have freelance writers everywhere doing the work. In the past, 15 years ago, sometimes people tell me not just about the turkey, but then I find out there were 150 people at Reader's Digest magazine, which I just think is, that would be a whole different kind of job. But we do hire freelancers. We have some people who are on kind of a regular contract, although not too many of those. What I have found is that you put people on contract and then they do 6 stories and then they want to do the same 6 stories again. So they end up with a specialty too that works well, but it doesn't work for more than a year or so at a time. But yeah, we have freelancers all over the country and all over the world.
Good. Well, this has been terrific, and thank you very much. I found it inspirational, and you should all become freelancers for the Reader's Digest. So thank you.